In this episode, we're uncovering a story from the depths of the internet. One that's not just spooky, but unsettling in ways you won't see coming. If you're up for a tale with a twisted ending that will leave you questioning everything, you are definitely in the right place. So grab a cup of tea, get comfy, and prepare for a story that will stay with you long after it's over. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe for more. I was 25, stuck in the paying my dues phase of life. High school wasn't exactly my shining moment, with my grades barely scraping average. Now, I'm juggling technical college and a part-time job, trying to carve out my own path, just like my parents. They're successful. Mom's a lawyer, Dad's an airplane mechanic. But I wasn't about to coast on their achievements. I had to make a name for myself, earn my keep. But damn, the daily grind was wearing me down. My parents' place, tucked far from the city, meant I spent nearly an hour every day driving back and forth. It got old fast, the time slipping through my fingers, leaving me constantly exhausted. They could tell. That's when my dad had an idea. He had a brother, my uncle, another airplane mechanic, actually the one who taught Dad everything he knew. My uncle passed away 6 months ago. Cancer, I think. He didn't have a wife or kids, so when he died, everything he owned went to Dad. That included his house, a 2-story place just 5 minutes from the city. Dad thought it would be a good idea for me to move in. It was closer to town, meant less gas money, less wasted time. Seemed like a win-win. So, with a shrug and a half-hearted smile, I agreed. The day we pulled up, it was hot, sun blazing, the kind of heat that sticks to your skin. Dad and I rolled up the driveway with my stuff in the back of the truck. There it was, Uncle Joe's house, painted in this worn-out hunter green. It had a few loose tiles and some chipped paint, but it still looked solid. It was familiar, too. I'd stayed there a few times when I was a kid. Not that I loved it. My uncle was quiet, weird, the kind of guy who never had much to say, but when he did speak, it was all about work. "Hard work's all you need, boy," he'd say, a cigarette dangling from his lips, his gravelly voice grating in my ears. "You work hard enough. You'll never have to beg for a thing." I never really knew what to make of him. He didn't seem to like kids much. The house didn't either. No TV, no toys, just dust and silence. Inside, not much had changed. Sheets covered the old furniture like ghosts hiding in plain sight. There was a picture on the mantel, me, Dad, and Uncle Joe, back when we'd gone fishing. I smiled as I remembered that day. Uncle Joe had caught a decent-sized fish, but when I pulled in an even bigger one, his deadpan expression broke into this rare, proud grin. Anyway, we hauled my stuff inside, and that's when I noticed it for the first time. That smell. Something sour, rotten, like dead leaves or, hell, maybe a dead rat in the walls. The place had been empty for a while, so I didn't think too much of it. That night, after my dad hugged me goodbye and drove away, I found myself alone in this creaky old house. The walls felt like they were pressing in, the rooms far too big, far too silent. I put on a movie to drown out the quiet. Still, every now and then, I heard something. A creak in the hallway, a thud from upstairs. I told myself it was just the house settling. It was old, nothing more. Days passed, and while I settled into my new routine, the house refused to settle into mine. The smell, that damn smell, lingered no matter how much I scrubbed, no matter how many air fresheners I sprayed. And the noises, they weren't going away either. But I brushed it off. I had classes, work. I was too busy to deal with some weird house issues. Then, one night, everything changed. I came home from a long shift at work, exhausted, and just wanting to crash. I pulled into the driveway and froze. All the lights were on. I stared at the glowing windows, my brain slow to catch up. I knew for a fact I'd turned everything off before leaving that morning. I always did. My parents weren't visiting. They'd have called first. No one else had a key. Then, through one of the windows, I saw them. 3 figures, shadows moving across the room. My heart jumped into my throat. I killed the engine, my hands shaking as I dialed 911. The minutes crawled. 5 police cars screeched into the driveway, their lights cutting through the night. The cops moved in, guns drawn, ready for whatever waited inside. I watched from the safety of my car, praying this was all just some mistake. It wasn't. The officers kicked the door in and swept the house. I waited, the seconds stretching into what felt like hours. Then they came back out. No burglars, no shadows, just 5 frustrated cops looking at me like I'd lost my mind. "There's no one in there," one of them said, his voice flat, tired. "You sure you saw something?" I tried to explain. The lights, the figures. But the more I talked, the more they looked at me like I was the problem. I passed their sobriety test. I wasn't high, I wasn't drunk, but it didn't matter. They told me to get some sleep, that I was probably stressed out, maybe left the lights on by accident. I couldn't argue, I was too rattled, but that night I called my parents. They told me to change the locks, maybe get some cameras. I was on my own. And that's when the house really started to unravel. It began with the nightmares. For weeks I'd wake up drenched in sweat, and my heart pounding. One dream in particular still haunts me. I saw 2 little girls, maybe 4 and 6, running down a long hallway. Their tiny feet slapped against the floor as they ran, terrified. The older girl kept urging the younger one to stay quiet. They ran and ran until they reached a door at the end of the hallway. Hope flickered in their eyes as they reached for the knob. Then it appeared. A tall, menacing shadow. Its presence was suffocating. I could feel the terror of those girls, the weight of their doom pressing down on me. Just before it could grab them, I jolted awake, gasping for air. That night I was shaken by the nightmare. The confusion was swirling in my mind. It felt so real, too real. Sleep slipped away from me, and I rubbed my eyes, trying to shake off the remnants of the nightmare. I decided I needed to go downstairs and watch some TV to help me relax. Slipping on my slippers, I reached for the door. But as soon as I opened it, the 2 girls from my dream raced past me, their small hands clasped together, faces pale and filled with fear. They darted down the hallway, just like in my dream, and disappeared into the darkness before they could reach the door, leaving me standing there, frozen in shock. At that moment, something inside me snapped. This wasn't just a bad dream or some stress-induced hallucination. Something was wrong with this house. I called my parents again, desperate for answers. My mom suggested there could be a carbon monoxide leak or mold, something messing with my head. It made sense, right? We decided to renovate the house, clear out any toxins, fix the place up. Maybe then I'd stop feeling like I was losing my mind. We started in the basement. The basement was cold and damp, with a dirt floor that hadn't been touched in years. Spiderwebs clung to the ceiling, and old holiday decorations were shoved into the corners, gathering dust. My dad brought over all the tools. He was excited to help me turn this place into something livable, into a home I could be proud of. I tried to share in his optimism, but the weight in my chest grew heavier the deeper we dug. That smell, the one that had lingered for weeks, only got worse the further down we went. I had chalked it up to mold, or some dead animal, but now it was suffocating, like something rotten festering beneath the surface. We figured we'd find some old carcass, maybe a raccoon or something that had crawled in and died, but what we uncovered was much, much worse. I'll never forget the sound the shovel made when it hit something solid. It wasn't the dull thud of dirt or stone. It was a sharp crack, like bone splintering. I froze. My dad did too, his face pale under the flickering basement light. Slowly, cautiously, he knelt down and brushed away the dirt with his hands. And there it was, a skull. I stumbled backward, the blood draining from my face. For a moment, I convinced myself it had to be fake, a Halloween decoration my uncle had forgotten about. But as we cleared more of the dirt away, it became horrifyingly clear that this was no decoration. Bones, human bones, skulls, rib cages, small fragments of vertebrae. We unearthed clothing too, tattered, faded remnants of what looked like children's pajamas. My dad didn't say a word. His hands shook as he stood up and grabbed his phone, calling the police with a voice that barely held together. When they arrived, it was chaos. Cops swarmed the house, their grim expressions mirroring the dread curling in my gut. They cordoned off the basement, dragging out body bag after body bag. 15 in total, each one filled with bones that had once been living, breathing people. The news hit like a sledgehammer. 15 bodies found in the basement of an airplane mechanic's home. It was all over the headlines. But the most devastating blow came a few days later when the DNA results confirmed the worst. My uncle wasn't just the quiet, reserved man I'd known all my life. He was a killer, a monster. For years he'd been kidnapping children, mostly little girls, and doing God knows what to them before burying them beneath his house. The police couldn't say for sure how they died. The bodies were too decomposed, too far gone to provide clear answers. But the clothes, the bones, they were enough. And the voices, the ones I'd heard at night, the faces of those little girls in my dreams, they were real. They had been crying out for help all along. The fallout was unbearable. My dad, always the strong one, always in control, was shattered. He couldn't believe his own brother, the man he had looked up to, had been capable of such horror. He barely spoke after that, retreating into himself. I think a part of him died that day, crushed under the weight of betrayal. As for me, I was left haunted by what I had seen and heard in that house. Every night, I still hear the voices of those girls, their desperate pleas for salvation echoing in my ears. Therapy helped, but only so much. How do you move on from something like that? How do you live knowing that someone you trusted, someone who had been part of your life, was capable of such evil? We demolished the house, of course, and later on we sold the plot. There was no way anyone could live there after what had been uncovered. It was tainted, cursed by the atrocities committed within its walls. The land itself felt poisoned, like the very ground was soaked in blood. But even with the house gone, the memories remain. I try to push them down, try to focus on my life, my work, my future. I finished school, started my career, moved to a new city. But no matter where I go, I can't escape the nightmares. The two little girls still run through my dreams, fleeing from a faceless shadow who never stops chasing them. And sometimes, when I wake in the dead of night, I swear I can still hear them. Soft, desperate voices calling out to me from the darkness. The past never really leaves you. It lingers, like a shadow that stretches long after the sun has set, always hovering just behind you, waiting. And I'll never forget. Not the smell, not the bones, not the terrible realization that the man I called Uncle Joe was a monster hiding in plain sight. As we wrap up this chilling story, remember, sometimes even the ones we think we love are hiding a monster behind a nice smile. If you found this story gripping and want to hear more, please subscribe and hit that notification bell. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and I'll catch you in the next one. Stay curious and keep looking over your shoulder. You never know who might be watching.